YouTube and Facebook, and then we're off to go. No, 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 no,
Yeah,
no.
that's a premiere for me, actually. Yes, being in a
In a
Slovenian
four.
medium. Yeah,
So, ladies and gentlemen, uh, my guest tonight is Dietmar Pieper, Pieper or
yeah, that's
Pieper.
right.
Yeah, German investigative journalist. He comes from a celebrity newspaper, Der Spiegel. And Dietmar, thank you for accepting my invitation.
It's a
Um,
pleasure.
it would be
Thank you.
fine if we talked in German. I do speak German, but I'm not as fluent in German as I am in English. So we're going to speak English tonight. Thank you for accepting that, Dietmar.
Yeah,
So this is your
thank you for
debut.
inviting me.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. You're my first journalist. You're my first foreign investigative journalist that accepted my invitation for a live stream. So I'm very pleased to do our live stream tonight. So who is Dietmar Pieper?
Oh well, that's a tough one to start with. Yeah, I'm a journalist. Yeah, I'm working as a journalist for more than 30 years now. That's my profession, and I still like it a lot. It's a great job as a journalist, and I did different things. I worked in German politics, and I was like in the field in Germany right after the fall of the wall. That was a great time. I was as a correspondent for the Spiegel magazine in Dresden, which was really great. And I love to be there in this, adventurous time, and also, tough time for all former East Germans, of course. So yeah, that's what I do. And now I'm in the foreign department for a couple of years, and that's also great. Not much traveling at the moment, though. Yeah. So of course,
Yeah,
lots
because
of
of the
video
corona.
conferencing.
um, what did you study when you went to university? Did you
Oh, my
study
university.
journalism or? Uh,
Actually, yeah. What did I study? I studied German literature as a major. And I did that in Berlin, in West Berlin at that time, before the fall of the wall, when the East German and the West German nations were divided. And then I spent a year in Austin, Texas, which was actually great. It sounds a little bit odd, maybe, to study German literature in Texas, but it was fantastic because they have fantastic libraries, a great staff, extremely friendly people, and yeah, you could work night and day if you wanted to, because it was open all the time, the university, which I didn't know back then from Berlin. They had like closing hours at, I think it was like 6 p.m. and the library was closed. And so you had, of course, you could learn at home if you wanted to, but I didn't. Berlin, even back then, had a good nightlife.
did Germany's universities liberalize in the similar way as it was back then in the States? Are they open now 24 hours too?
Ah, well, I don't know really. I think things have changed a lot in Germany. I mean, um, I don't know if that's relevant at the moment, but anyhow, it's not long ago that even shops in Germany closed at 6:30 p.m. You know, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe, shops closed, and on Saturdays it was 2 p.m. And then you couldn't go shopping anymore, not even some bread or milk. So Germany has
Interesting.
changed a lot.
Yeah, it was probably very similar to Slovenia because Slovenia um, uh, is a copycat of Germany probably.
Is it
Everything
really?
come, yeah, probably.
Not of Austria?
Well, Austria is a proxy. Austria is a proxy.
Yeah, well, if I remember right, there was quite some support from the German back then, from the German foreign minister for the independence of Slovenia. Do I remember that right? Yeah,
Dietmar Genscher.
yeah, Hans Dietrich Genscher. He was
Hans
like
Dietrich
really
Genscher. Yeah.
supportive of Slovenian independence in 1990, 91.
91. Yeah,
91, yeah.
We had luck that Germany backed us up, that Austria backed us up.
Yeah.
We would be in big problems if they wouldn't, but they did, and so we have to be very grateful. I mean, by we, I mean those Slovenes that are glad, that are happy to have an independent state. There are not nowadays. There are many Slovenes that are nostalgic of Yugoslavia and think that Slovenia was a mistake and so forth. But
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Interesting to know. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, I remember one thing I have to ask you about. There was a famous pop rock band in the 80s, Laibach. Ever heard of them? I don't know
Yeah,
I don't know what happened to Laibach, but they were really famous for being a little bit provocative.
they had this brand, or they were a part of this broader brand called Neue Slowenische Kunst. Um,
Yeah.
um, they were basically left liberal leaning kind of band or cultural phenomenon that tried to that they were the part of liberalizing the communist party of Yugoslavia. But yeah, how did you guys in Germany perceive Leibach?
Actually, well, yeah, it's a really faint remembrance, only a faint memory. It's mid '80s, something like that, and it was like, yeah, you said left leaning. I remember they were suspected of being somehow right leaning because of yeah Nazi. It's of course Ljubljana and it's not Laibach anymore, and so people thought, well, they're using this old German word, and so has to do something with Nazi ideology. Or, I don't know. Maybe it was just a provocation.
Yeah, it was a provocation. It was ironic, sarcastic. They were trying to provoke, but I'm not quite sure whom they were trying to provoke. But probably the Communist Party,
Yeah.
as in a symbol of anti-fascist something. But I guess
Yeah.
80s were messed up era, and nobody knew what was happening in the world. Everybody somehow knew that everything was going towards the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of communism. But yeah, that was the time. So what I wanted to ask you, I when I tried to inform myself a little bit about the history of Der Spiegel, um, I came across the 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 critique, the most common critique against Der Spiegel. That's very I'm very familiar with it because I come from a more right wing leaning media. I'm a more right wing leaning philosopher or thinker, and we often tend to criticize, for example, Slovene national television and also some commercial televisions that they are pretending to be objective. And I came across this common critique against Der Spiegel. One of the main criticisms of Der Spiegel concerns its use of language. In '57, writer Hans Magnus Enzensberger published his essay Die Sprache des Spiegels, the language of
Hmm.
Der Spiegel, in which he criticized what he called a pretended objectivity. The same guy in 57, however, admitted in a written statement that no other contemporary German magazine attained the Spiegel's level of objectivity. Do you have a stance on this issue?
Yeah, well, of course, it's a very famous essay, and Hans Magnus Enzensberger is probably one of the most famous living essayistic intellectuals in Germany. And actually, I wrote my master's thesis about Enzensberger, and it was titled Hans Magnus Enzensberger's Medientheorie, his theory of media. Well, and when I was right into that thesis, I discovered he had no theory. He just had thoughts, interesting thoughts, but no theory. There was nothing consistent in his thinking, which is probably his strength. He is not a philosopher. He's a brilliant intellectual, and he's a great writer, and he's very gifted. So yeah, I know what he wrote about the Spiegel, and of course he has a point in saying that Spiegel journalism back then more than now. Of course, Spiegel has changed also, but the classic journalism of Der Spiegel does not even pretend to be totally objective. It's a narrated, we call it Nachrichtengeschichte. It's stories. It's not news which you find in a news agency like Reuters or AFP or something like that. So, and the model of Der Spiegel is Time magazine or Newsweek. It's these are the great role models of Der Spiegel, and so we try to, and that we still do a lot, to tell stories about people and to convey facts by telling stories about what people do, what people think, politicians, normal people, cultural people. So that's our approach, basically. But now it's a lot more differentiated than it was in the 1950s or 1960s.
And how did it change? Did it change across the political spectrum, or it changed according to, yeah?
Yeah, it changed. I think the political spectrum opened somehow. Like you can probably some people still remember Helmut Kohl, the longtime German chancellor. He started out as a major German politician in the 70s from the more right-leaning, not really right, but Christian conservative CDU, Christlich-Demokratische Union. So he was, and Spiegel, the leading people at the Spiegel magazine, they hated him. They thought he was a real bad chancellor when he came into office in the early 80s, and they really tried. Of course, they couldn't, they didn't succeed, but they tried to really give him a hard time and to push him out of office somehow with finding scandals or whatever, and supporting his party, his enemies in the party, things like that. But he stayed. So this tells you something about the impact of journalism. If somebody is really rooted in his party, as Helmut Kohl was, and he was successful in elections, well, journalists can write a lot, and the politician stays.
How's, for example, Angela Merkel different from Helmut Kohl? Because she was supposedly also diese christliche Demokratie. How is she different, or is she not?
Oh, she
What's
is.
the relationship? She is. Okay.
Yeah, she is. I mean, she was kind of discovered by Kohl in the early 90s. She's, as you know, from the former German Democratic Republic, and she joined politics in these turbulent times during the peaceful revolution, and then she made a real yeah, she made a real career early on in her 30s. She became deputy party chief, protected with the like support of Kohl, and then she managed to free herself from his influence, and she made a cut, a famous cut when Helmut Kohl was really deep into the parties in a scandal, in a financial scandal, having had black money hidden in some Swiss and Liechtenstein bank accounts, hidden from the public and even from his own party, and and then she made a cut and freed herself of her father figure, and she's really independent woman. Yeah, that she is.
How did Der Spiegel cover? Well, nowadays she's mostly known, at least in Slovenia, with us lay people that are not very good informed or amazingly informed about German politics. She's considered nowadays as she's connected with this big migration crisis in 2015.
Mm.
How did Der Spiegel cover this crisis? What was your stance towards it? What was the? How do you? I would like to hear your own opinion and Der Spiegel's stance on it. What's the spirit of German people? How do the German people look at Angela Merkel today, and what do they think of her, and how do they think about this crisis? She supposedly got Germans and Europe into.
Okay, there was some lapse in what you asked, just technically, but I think I got your question.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a topic of endless debate in Germany, of course, as probably in many other countries too. And it's hard to, it's impossible to tell what the Germans think. You can, of course, you have like opinion polls, and you can tell majorities and minorities and things like that. Well, starting with, well, what did my magazine, what did we do? We were supportive, basically, in this. We of course, we are not always supportive of the government, mostly not, I would say. But in this case, we were basically supportive of the humanitarian point of view she took, the humanitarian perspective, let me call it like this. And I think there's a sort of misunderstanding quite common in Germany. The misunderstanding goes like this: Angela Merkel, she opened the borders for the refugees. I think that's not true. I think it's a little bit different. She didn't close the borders for the refugees. She could have changed the policy, and she could have given an executive order. There was quite interesting. I talked to him, the head of the federal police in Germany. He had a plan when the migration crisis got bigger and bigger, and he had a worked out plan and said, okay, that's what we have to do. That's how we can close the borders. And he presented it, of course, to the Minister of the Interior, his boss. But this paper and this plan was also in the Chancellery. I don't know if it reached Angela Merkel personally, but of course she knew about it, and it was one of her options. And she didn't really opt. She didn't do it. She had the option, but she didn't do it. So she let the borders open. Yeah, well, of course, you know what happened in German politics. Then there were many people who were very critical of this, and they feared really worse things to happen in Germany, and more crime, and great unemployment, and a loss of German identity, and all that. And this is still not over. You still have this in Parliament. You see it. The AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, they got strong by opposing the migration policy of the government and Angela Merkel. And they established themselves as a force in German politics. So that was happened. Yeah. And we still struggle with it. We would struggle more with it if there wasn't Corona, of course.
What would you say are the strongest arguments, in your opinion, against Angela Merkel's humanitarianism or her approach to this crisis? Do you think there are any good arguments against it?
Well, a good argument against it is that if you act like this, maybe it's an incentive for people to start migrating. Maybe. I think that's possible. I think that's possible if people think, and you have people saying that, like, yeah, we know we can go to Europe, and people in Europe are friendly, and they will take care of us. And so, yeah, and that's probably not what should be done. We shouldn't have incentives for migration.
There was this affair in 2018, unprecedented affair that shows unprecedented correctness and fairness of the Spiegel, I would say. I might be wrong, and please, you can correct me, and other people can correct me, but the affair with Klaas Relotius.
Oh, okay.
What happened there? Der Spiegel made public that reporter Klaas Relotius had admitted that he had falsified his articles on a grand scale, inventing facts, persons, and quotations in at least 14 of his stories. The magazine uncovered the fraud after a co-author of one of Relotius' stories, Juan Moreno, became suspicious of the veracity of Relotius' contributions and gathered evidence against him. So his co-worker co-opted him.
Yeah, this was, of course, probably one of the biggest scandals that ever happened to a German publication in the post-war era. Yeah, and it's still kind of unbelievable, actually. It's that somebody who was a trusted reporter and a kind person, not arrogant, on the contrary, yeah, that he could fake complete stories. I was, of course, part of the team re-investigating his. We re-investigate all of his stories to find out if there was anything right. Let's put it like this. Of course, there were some things were correct. There maybe, I forgot, maybe one or two stories were totally correct, but probably everything was corrupted somehow, more or less corrupted. And so I remember I re-investigated a story about a woman in the US who supposedly had as a kind of strange hobby to go to executions. Yeah, it was a patchwork of truth and lies, very skillfully done, skillfully. Well written, of course.
Do you think there are famous newspapers across the West that have probably or maybe the same examples of fake journalism? This is a speculation, of course. But,
this is a total speculation. Yeah, I don't know, but we are not the first to be haunted by something like that. I don't know of examples in Europe, but even the New York Times, they had trouble with fake journalism, not in the scale. I think it was not so many fake stories, but In one instance, it was even a Pulitzer Prize that was a fake story. And so, yeah, we are not the first ones. But the scale, the audacity is really incredible of this guy. Yeah.
What's the prevalent hypothesis? Why did he do that? Fame, or was he not mentally okay?
I don't really know. I didn't know him very well, actually, personally. And he went, as far as I know, he went into medical treatment, but I have no idea. What I know is that he didn't start, I mean, this is documented, it's not speculation. He didn't start doing this at Der Spiegel. He probably even started doing this when he was still in his education as a journalist. But what was the driving force behind this? I don't know.
My main interest tonight is because I came across with one of your articles when I tried to write an article. So you obviously do the research about Sweden. You wrote an article about Sweden and their behavior towards elderly people. Uh, what did your research about this topic, about this theme, about this area show? And or did you research the the so-called Swedish model, even in a broader sense, or did you come across this event by accident?
No, I am interested in Sweden, and I'm kind of covering Sweden for Der Spiegel for 3 years now. Usually Sweden is not very interesting for German journalists because nothing much happens. Let's put it like this. This is a little bit unfair, but that's how it is. I mean, it's no major crisis in Sweden. Of course, they had their refugee crisis, a little bit similar as Germans, and I wrote about this, but normally you don't write about Sweden a lot. Okay, but then with the start of COVID, of Corona, Sweden had their own way. They had their own special way, and without lockdown, they were almost unique in Europe and in the world. And so I wrote, I think, 4 or 5 articles about Sweden and Corona in the last months. And last one, the one you saw, was about it's a really tough issue. I think it's that there's enough evidence that they really let people die who could still live, because for some reasons they had a kind of a manual for their medical doctors and their elderly homes for who gets the best treatment and who just gets morphine and painkillers, and that's really heavy. And there's enough evidence by doctors, by nurses, by relatives. What we can't say at the moment is how many cases. I don't know. Is it 100 cases? Is it 300 cases? I don't know. There's an investigation going on in Sweden, and maybe they find it out.
Could this be something on a governmental level, or do you think this is more of a local phenomena?
I think it's a little bit of everything, and it's not, in my opinion, it's not that there's a single institution or even a single person or a government institution who wanted things to be like this. I think nobody wanted to be things like this, but it was setting rules, following rules in a kind of very, very hyper rational way, instead of asking, okay, do these rules really apply to my case, and do they make sense? That's my opinion. these doctors, they weren't bad people inherently, of course not. But they had rules and they followed the rules instead of asking themselves, is that the right thing to do?
Yeah, I would probably question if they weren't for bad people, because it seems to me that deontological thinking, not utilitarian thinking, is an inherent part of what doctors uh, should probably do and think, at least when there's not I mean I mean doctors who think utilitaristically instead of deontologically, this is a really heavy this is really heavy thing. I'm not saying that that Swedes are the only ones. We have many, or at least some doctors in Slovenia that think the same way too. But it seems to me that at least doctors in the past, that their Hippocratic oath, that it seemed that it implied deontological thinking, not utilitaristical thinking. Okay, maybe epidemic, pandemia, pandemic states of affairs are a little bit of extra situation, but I don't know. Do you have any doctors in Germany that think the same, that express the same opinions?
Not openly, not openly, but I'm pretty sure that you have the same thinking among
Yeah.
German doctors. Some, it's a huge population, German doctors, and I know of there's quite a prominent doctor here in Hamburg who is, in my opinion, downplaying the risk of corona, and he's a, how do you say, a pathologist. Yes, he's like look in when somebody dies, he's looking what are the causes for
Yeah.
his death, and he was like looking into 100 or more than 100 corona victims, dead people, and he's claiming that, okay, all these people, well, they died from corona, but they didn't really die from corona because they had a heart disease or a kidney disease or something else. So these people had to die anyway, pretty soon. That's basically what he says. And so his opinion is that the risk of corona is not so high, and people are over exaggerating, and so he's prominent for this. And there's probably other doctors thinking the same way. Yeah, and actually, if I may say that, in what I was writing about this, I was kind of a little bit of a dystopian. I had some dystopian elements in what I was writing, because I think this is in societies. And Germany is among these societies where people get older and older and older, and well, there will be hard choices for not only in times of corona, but we have to make in the health system. Of course, in every health system, you have to make choices. Who gets which treatment and how much do we want to pay for it as a society? And we really have to be aware. That is my point. I have no solution, but I think we have to be more aware of this. And what happened in Sweden is an example of what can happen if you don't really think about it. I think it's, in my opinion, they didn't really think about it. That's what I was just saying. They just did. Maybe it was different, but that's my impression.
How did Germany's government react in the first wave and now in the second wave? Are they more? What kind of approach do they have towards corona?
In the beginning, like in many other European countries, they had a soft approach. They didn't realize how dangerous, in my opinion, dangerous this disease would would become, or still was, or already was. So I find it very interesting, if I may say that, that's not only in Germany but for for all European countries. When we look back into January, everybody knew and heard in the news about something happening there in China. Seemed to be far away. Then the World Health Organization, WHO, they issued the highest alert on January 30. It has a technical term. They didn't say pandemic. They didn't say we have pandemic. They said we have a public health emergency of international concern. This is a technical term. But that's the highest alert they have. And everybody who's in the field knows what that means. But people didn't really react, like politicians or the high-ranking health officials in Germany. They didn't really react to it. Only when the WHO talked of pandemic in a more popular sense, then the reaction started, and when things in Italy got really bad, in northern Italy, you know what I mean, in February, then there was a strong reaction, not before. So they didn't realize in the beginning what was going on. And then, of course, we had the different reactions in, like, Sweden with their special way. Great Britain also in the beginning, UK was trying well, they were talking about herd immunity, but then they changed. Germany, they had their medium-sized lockdown, I would say. France, Italy, Spain, they had heavier lockdowns. I don't know about Slovenia.
Yeah, it was probably. It was not like in New Zealand, that's for sure. We didn't have any army or night curfew. We have a curfew now from tomorrow on or today on, but in the
Okay.
first wave we didn't. So we had semi soft policies against COVID. What do you think that this in if you see if you see Europe, it seems that in Europe there is no corona or COVID or pandemics is not a left wing or right wing thing. Um, for example, I know our current government is right to the center government if you're very optimistic, but this government understands communicates very well with for example administration of Donald Trump in America. But we have this uh, funny situation where in America, for example, uh, the government, the so-called right-wing or conservative government, is taking this libertarian approach towards COVID and pandemics, or at least Donald Trump is using that kind of rhetoric. And in Slovenia, for example, we have a left-wing opposition that is hysterically against any kind of policies uh, against COVID. How would you explain this? Are political parties in Germany more united in this cause?
Maybe more. I don't know about your situation. You explained it, so maybe there's probably more of a division. What I get from what you said, we have a nuanced, so to say, reaction. The government, which is center, well, yeah, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, this is a huge spectrum. So, and the Greens, they pretty much agree, and even the Left Party, the former Communist Party, they, I would say, basically agree on 80–90% of what's happening. And then you have the more libertarian Free Democrats and the AfD, the right-wing populists. They oppose more or less what the government does. And there, interestingly enough, we have the Sweden fans. Yeah, that's the Team Sweden. They are, when they have demonstrations, they are waving, among other things, Swedish national flags and saying, okay, we should give more freedom to the people and put away with the masks and things like that. So, yeah. This is the political divide in Germany.
Did you guys on Der Spiegel write any investigative articles on the origin of coronavirus?
Could you repeat that?
On the origin of coronavirus, on the relationship between China Communistic Party and World Health Organization and so forth?
Can you? Okay. Here,
Yeah, you fell out.
Back again. I
Okay.
don't know what happened. Maybe
Yeah,
it's my internet. I don't know.
You're back. You're back. That's all that
okay.
matters.
So yeah, the origin. Yeah, we did. Our correspondent in Beijing. He was trying to make sense of what happened in Wuhan, and he put and we have a local assistant there, a Chinese journalist, and they really put some effort into what was happening in Wuhan, and the story that the virus may have been concocted in some suspicious lab close to that food market in Wuhan, and well, they have no decisive result. I would say it's still very difficult. I mean, the origin, that's something I just know as a reader about. I did no research of my own in this. I read some very interesting stories. You might have heard of them too, that there was a virus, the coronavirus, already in December somewhere in Europe. I think it was in France, that they found in a medical, somehow in a lab, they found something that pointed to the coronavirus already in December and things like that. So, yeah, very interesting stories, but no conclusion so far. For me, no conclusion.
This is a little bit of off topic, but a viewer asked in the beginning something I don't have a clue about, but maybe you do. Dietmar, Ales, could you ask Dietmar about Baader Meinhof gang at some point? Do you know anything about Baader Meinhof gang?
Yes, of course. This is, I was born in 63, so Baader Meinhof gang was in the 70s. I grew up with hearing stories of Baader Meinhof gang in the news and in the papers, and yeah, big thing, left-wing German terrorism, and they killed and kidnapped many high-ranking German politicians and leaders from company leaders, CEOs. Yeah, and yeah, famous stories in Germany, so to say. Yeah, real estate crisis especially 1977, the so-called German fall, der Deutsche Herbst, when there was really an emergency because they were hitting one after the other, and with incredible logistics.
We in Yugoslavia, in Slovenia, and in the whole Yugoslavia, we had this perception of Germany, at least Western Germany, that it was fully capitalistic country, and this is we had many Gastarbeiters, people that went to work to Germany and then sent money uh, to Yugoslavia, so our country could survive. And But you're German-born fellow. How was the left-wing politics in Germany from the 45 till 91? Was it suppressed, or was it how did the Communist Party do in this 50 years window? Were they strong or were they forbidden?
Wow, that's the communists. Okay, um, actually, the Communist Party, the KP of Germany, they were forbidden in the 50s. I don't remember exactly. Well, I wasn't born then, but okay, that's the first, and that's for a democracy. That's heavy stuff to order by the court that a political party is illegal. But that's what they did with the Communist Party, and. But then there was another, or there were many other communist parties, really small ones, of course. As you know, on the very left side, people tend to gather in small fractions and to fight against each other, and whether you like Stalin or Mao or something like that, and there was a mediums. No, not really. No, you can't say there was no strong communist party in Germany. Never. But people were afraid on the more conservative spectrum, and even among the Social Democrats, of course, they were afraid of a left-wing communist uprising, something like that. And especially after the student revolt of the late 1960s, and that's where the offspring, or where the roots of this Baader-Meinhof gang also were. They had their roots in the student revolt, and then took off in a very strange direction.
I
Yeah,
remember.
let me just say one
Yeah,
thing for left and right. It was a major event, a major political thing for Germany, when we had the first social democratic chancellor in, I think it was 69, when Willy Brandt became chancellor. Somebody who was really ridiculed and how to say, actually hated by the conservatives, and they did things Donald Trump today does, and really telling false stories about him, and yeah, but he became chancellor.
How do you look, for example, I don't know what's the situation in Germany, but how do you look at American Democratic Party? I remember we used to say about Democrats and Republicans in America that there is no big difference between these two parties. They are the parties of capital. This is how we used to talk about these two parties. They only have this minor social cultural differences, but they are both parties of multinational corporations and grand capital and so forth. But it seems today that this party has turned extremely to the left. Even with Joe Biden, although he was a vice president of a social democrat, Obama, it seems that the greater part of the party is now not socially democratic anymore. That they really turn radically to the left. Do you see that party similarly? And do you see that perhaps that turn in German politics too?
To start with the second question, no, I don't see that. There's
Okay.
no left turn in German party politics, not at all. The German Social Democrats, have a fairly new leadership. It's two not very well-known people, one man, one woman, not very lucky in their what they are doing. Not very lucky, but they were trying to push the Social Democrat a little bit more to the left. But then they choose as a candidate for the next election, their top candidate, someone from the right-wing spectre of the Social Democrats. So nothing happens in the Social Democratic Party in Germany. Nothing really, I mean. The U.S. Democrats. I'm a little bit skeptical about if your picture is correct, because I suppose, I'm not really deep into it, but I suppose that the more radical forces, they are small but loud, and they don't really appeal to the majority of the Democratic voters, I suppose. Because people don't change overnight, and they don't vanish somewhere, and they don't radicalize in masses. But the more radical forces are loud, and they make themselves heard. And basically, the big issues are, in my opinion, social democratic, like healthcare for Obamacare is a social democratic project, nothing left wing. Whatever Trump says, it's not left wing.
I have two questions from the audience. Another question from the same viewer that asked you about Baader Meinhof. He asks Dietmar if he thinks any modern equivalent of Baader Meinhof is likely or possible. For example, I don't know, Antifa or Black Lives Matter. I don't know if you have the those in. You probably have those also in Germany.
Small.
Small groups. Even we have them, and we don't have any black people in
No.
in Slovenia. And the other question is, can you ask Dietmar his opinion on the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, if you have one?
Okay, the first question is easier for me. Well, you never know, of course. At the moment, I would say nothing like that visible. Nothing of a left-wing terrorist force is visible. We had maybe you've heard of it, when the G20 summit was in Hamburg, there were riots in the city, and that was left-wing riots, and but it was nothing but riots, no terrorism, and that's about it. On the other hand, what was new in the last decade was that we had right-wing terrorism, which we haven't had before. Like right-wing people, the NSU, they called themselves National Socialist Underground, Nationalsozialistischer Untergrund. This emerged in the last decade or so, and this was and is a fairly new phenomenon which we have to deal with. And so there's a little bit more danger maybe from the right than from the left. And as far as Armenia and Azerbaijan is concerned, well, I'm really not an expert about this. I think if you want to really understand what's happening there, you have to look to Moscow and Ankara. It's probably the main forces behind that conflict are, of course, it's the local people. They want to live in the way they want to live. Like the Armenians in Azerbaijan, they just probably want to live their Armenian way. And I think that's understandable. But behind the conflict, there's a geopolitical thing, probably, with a heavy influence.
Um, what about America's Antifa and Black Lives Matter? Do you take more of a Michelle Obama stance that these protests, although combined with looting and pillaging and so forth, uh, is mostly peaceful? Or do you think that Americans do have problem with left-wing terrorism, or they could have problems with left-wing terrorism?
Mm. That will be seen after the 3rd of November. I'm actually a little bit, well, afraid is maybe too heavy, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were some real heavy riots starting. In any case, how Biden wins, Trump wins, there's a fair chance that we will see some riots, heavy violence in the United States. And then we will see, is it more from the left or more from the right? Because you also have the Proud Boys and right-wing groups. So, but you also have the left-wing oriented. I forgot the name. This black. I think it's mostly black people or only black people marching in black uniforms and heavily
Black
armed.
militia, yeah, black
Yeah.
militia.
So you have it on both sides, and we will see how it plays out.
Okay, Dietmar, thanks again for joining me tonight. Thanks for taking your time. Thanks for answering my questions. I hope we can talk about some other topics some other time. I hope I can invite you again to my channel if another interesting topic occurs to me. And have a pleasant evening. And thank you.
Yeah, I thank you for good questions, thoughtful conversation, and yeah, see you again.
See you again. See you again. Thank you. Good
Thanks.
evening
Bye.
and good night.
Good
The
night.
audience also. Night.
Yes.